And thanks very much to the Allen County Museum for the invitation today, and also to all of you for braving some cold weather. Today marks the opening of the exhibition here entitled Threads of Conflict, Echoes of the Civil War. I took a, I'm not sure if I was allowed, but I snuck in and took a quick look in the past hour, and two items especially, two artifacts on display especially caught my eye. So one were some marksman spectacles. I have never seen anything like that before. What a cool little piece that is. And then some great local history, a massive 35-star flag that flew over the Lima recruiting office here in town. Again, make sure you take a look at that item as well. No doubt the Civil War stands as the defining episode in this nation's history. The Civil War made our nation a singular noun. Before the Civil War, people would say the United States are. Now we say the United States is. Okay? The death toll of the Civil War, now, and some historians have argued for a higher number than this, but stands at about 620,000 people. And that number is about the same number of American military deaths in all other wars combined. Okay? Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, World Wars I and II, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Afghanistan. You have the Civil War on one side, everything else on, and it's pretty darn even. It's pretty darn even. And while those numbers are staggering, remember that this war freed approximately 4 million enslaved folks, right? I was in graduate school when I heard a panelist say something to the effect of, why do we always refer to the Civil War as such a tragedy when 4 million people were freed because of it? And it was one of these moments in academia where the audible kind of went around the room. Yeah, so, okay, I thought of it this way. Okay. Americans love the Civil War and the memory of it. This is certainly the biggest crowd I've spoken to here. And the war still surrounds us today. I mean, the National Park Service stewards about 430 sites in this country. About 1/6 of them are directly connected to the Civil War. Okay? Ken Burns' documentary is the second most watched PBS miniseries ever, just behind baseball. Just behind Ken Burns' baseball. And then more recently, well over 100 Confederate monuments have been removed from public spaces in the last 5 years. It's kind of hard to watch the news without seeing these stories, certainly after 2020. But today I'm not going to talk about the Civil War of the 1860s. Rather, my focus is the tumultuous preceding decade. Okay? And I hope I can start to answer that question, how did the United States come to fight a civil war? Now this might be hard, but I want you to try to imagine an America that is so politically divided. I want you to try to imagine an America governed by a number of incompetent individuals. Try to imagine an America where fanaticism leads to breakdown in civil discourse and even violence. Just try to, I know it's hard. I know it's hard to imagine, just try, okay? We're talking about the 1850s, okay? So I want to look at 5 notable events today that demonstrate the growing divide between the northern and the southern states. And the dynamics of slavery are at the center of every one. So for a little context, I want to put presidents numbers 11 through 16 on the slide here. And since the mid-20th century, surveys have been conducted in order to construct historical rankings. We love these things. These are political scientists, they're academic scholars, public opinion even is factored into some of these things. But these rankings focus on presidential achievements, leadership qualities, failures, and faults. Lincoln, at the end, he has been ranked number one as the greatest president in more of these rankings than any other president. Okay, you will very, very rarely see him below number 2. Okay, now at the front of this list, I might argue that James K. Polk might be considered the most successful, not the best, but the most successful president the United States has ever had. Why do I say that? During his 4-year term, he met every single major domestic or foreign policy goal that he had set. Notably, during Polk's term in office, the U.S. greatly expanded. Okay? He annexed Texas, he claimed the Oregon Territory from Great Britain, he acquired California and New Mexico from Mexico. And when he ran for president in 1844, he vowed not to run for a second term. And he didn't. And he died about 3 months after he left office of cholera. But between Polk and Lincoln were a series of progressively worse presidents. Okay? Again, look at these rankings. Now, Taylor dies in office, and so he's mediocre at best, slightly below average, but he's just not in the job long enough. Fillmore, he is generally considered to be below average to poor. Franklin Pierce, he is one of a handful of examples of, as a sitting president, he didn't even get his party's nomination to run for re-election. Okay? He is often ranked as one of the 3 or 4 worst presidents we've had. And then James Buchanan, our only bachelor president, and I'm not saying this is connected, right? But he is ranked as the worst U.S. president in most of these historical surveys, as he just does little to deal with the rising issues of the 1850s. So let's look at the map. And you can see some of these territorial acquisitions. This is, again, a map from the mid-19th century. Weeks after California was acquired by the United States, gold was found at Sutter's Mill. And this led to a massive immigration in 1849. Hence, this is why the football team is the 49ers. Okay? And a debate over slavery in these newly acquired territories erupted. Okay? Many Southerners sought to expand slavery to these newly acquired lands, and the Northerners opposed such expansion. So the solution, this is our first notable here, the Compromise of 1850, okay, legislation. This was a temporary solution to diffuse this political confrontation. So what happens with the Compromise of 1850? California becomes a free state, but Utah Territory, the New Mexico Territory, those were still had popular sovereignty. That's a good term there, which meant that people living there could choose slavery down the road. If it, after statehood, they could choose whether they wish to be a free or a slave state. The Compromise of 1850 also strengthened the existing fugitive slave law. This slave law had required officials, constables, lawmen of the North to assist with the return of escaped slaves. This law required that citizens in the North also participate. Not just lawmen, but citizens participate in the return of escaped slaves. And any person aiding a runaway slave by providing food or shelter was subject to 6 months imprisonment and a $1,000 fine, which, again, a penalty that had not previously existed with the fugitive slave law. Officers who captured a fugitive slave were entitled to a bonus or a promotion for their work. So now we have greater incentive. So this is the Compromise of 1850. Now, I want to move on to number 2, a few years later. This is 1854. More legislation. I'll go slow because laws are heavy. Okay? The Kansas-Nebraska Act. Obviously, these two are states today. But this legislation was proposed by a senator from Illinois, Stephen Douglas, because Douglas was pushing a transcontinental railroad. And he thought if the railroad was going to go west, the land that the railroad would go through, it needed to be organized. It's unorganized on the map if it's just Kansas territory and Nebraska territory. So part of this bill stated that people in these territories could decide for themselves on slavery. Okay? Sovereignty is the watchword for Stephen Douglas. Again, Kansas and Nebraska. Now, why is this so notable? And I might just mention that for 150 years, historians have debated kind of the legacy of Stephen Douglas. How should we think of this Illinois senator? Did Douglas oppose slavery? Was he a compromiser? Was he just a devotee of principles? You'll get a different answer depending on who you ask. In a famous speech, though, in 1858, he repeatedly said, so I think maybe we should believe him, he did not care whether slavery was voted up or down, but only that the people had the right to vote it up or down. Now, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which incorporated these territories, repealed the Missouri Compromise from 3.5 decades earlier. Okay. Now, the Missouri Compromise was signed into law under President Monroe. You'd have to look at the map with a little bit of a knowing eye here. But Missouri and Maine became states simultaneously, same time. Maine, of course, being in New England, was a free state, and Southern legislators wanted a free state to come in with a slave state. So Missouri, when it comes into the Union, is a slave state, but there is a line drawn on the southern end of Missouri that would continue out west, which stipulated that all territory north of that line would come into the Union as free territory. Kansas and Nebraska are both north of that line. Okay? Again, if you can juxtapose those two maps, you will see that what you'll see here is a significant part of the Great Plains, again, had been off limits to slavery, and now it's under consideration again. Okay? So this Kansas-Nebraska Act heightened tensions over slavery and how it might spread. Okay. And then, of course, what happens after the Kansas-Nebraska Act is known as Bleeding Kansas, which could be a whole lecture in itself, really. But this was a series of violent civil, which is rather uncivil, confrontations over the legality of slavery in the proposed state of Kansas. And how do you determine slavery? Well, popular sovereignty, right? You vote. And so, it is a bit of a mess in Kansas for a few years. There were years of electoral fraud and raids, assaults, retributive murders carried out and in Kansas and in neighboring Missouri by pro-slavery border ruffians and anti-slavery free staters. Back and forth. There was a rush to settle the territory to participate in the voting. And there were actually two congresses set up in different towns. One pro-slavery, one anti-slavery. Northern abolitionists encouraged supporters to move to Kansas to secure the territory as a free state. And a year after this piece of legislation, a congressional committee investigated and reported, wrap your head around these, that over 1,700 fraudulent votes were cast compared to only 1,100 legal votes. In one location, of the 604 voters, only 20 of them were actual residents of the Kansas Territory. In another, 35 were residents and 226 were non-residents. And most famously here, this fella on the right, John Brown, he is vehemently anti-slavery. There was some retribution that John Brown carried out. There was a pro-slavery faction that had raided the anti-slavery town of Lawrence, now the university, KU, the Jayhawks, right there in Lawrence. John Brown's responded by hacking 5 pro-slavery individuals with broadswords, right? Blatant murder. We'll see Brown again. Event number 3. This is a violent episode that occurred on the floor of the U.S. Senate. This is in 1856. A senator from Massachusetts by the name of Charles Sumner, he had delivered a rousing, inflammatory, anti-slavery speech, and 2 days later, a representative, congressman, from South Carolina by the name of Preston Brooks, he confronted Sumner, who was seated at his desk, and he says, Mr. Sumner, I have read your speech twice. I've read it carefully. It is libel on South Carolina. And Mr. Butler, who is a relative of mine, there was a veiled, not so veiled, brandished a pistol. Okay, this is on the Senate floor. And shouted at the onlookers to leave Brooks and Sumner alone. Brooks continued beating Sumner until his cane broke. And then he quietly left the chamber. Sumner suffered head trauma, as you might imagine. It would cause him chronic pain the rest of his life. It was 3 years in recovery before he was able to return to the Senate. So again, this was a traumatic brain injury and what we would now call post-traumatic stress disorder from the attack. Brooks, for his part, received widespread adoration in South Carolina and other southern states after the attack. The city of Brooksville, Florida, and Brooks County, Georgia, named themselves for Brooks immediately afterwards. Brooks was tried in a Washington, D.C. court for the attack. He was convicted of assault, fined $300, but he was not incarcerated. South Carolinians sent Brooks dozens of canes. One with a phrase, "good job," inscribed on it, and another inscribed, "hit him again." Southern lawmakers made rings out of the original cane's remnants, which they wore on neck chains to show their solidarity with Brooks. There was an attempt to oust him from the House of Representatives, but this failed. But he did resign his seat that summer in 1856 to give his constituents the opportunity to ratify his conduct in a special election, which they did by electing him to this vacant seat in August that following month. So he was reelected to a full term in November of 1856, but he actually died about 5 weeks before the new term began in March. He died of a respiratory disease in January of 57. This event drew a sharply polarized response from the American public on the subject of the expansion of slavery. And it has been considered symbolic of a breakdown of reasoned discourse, and it's one that certainly leads to the outbreak of war. Now I want to move on to our fourth event of the 1850s, a fellow that some of you would certainly be familiar with, Dred Scott. Dred Scott was an enslaved black man whose owners had taken him from Missouri, and he is buried in St. Louis today. You can go see his grave. He's buried there. But Scott was taken from Missouri, which again was a slave-holding state, into east into what he went into Illinois. I think he went up to the Wisconsin territory. And when his owners brought him back to Missouri, Scott sued in court for his freedom, claiming that he had been taken into free U.S. territory. So he had automatically been free. That was his argument. And legally, he was no longer a slave. So Scott sued first in Missouri State Court, which ruled that he was still a slave under Missouri law. He then sued in U.S. federal court, which ruled against him by deciding that it had to apply Missouri law to the case. He then appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and this is the Chief Justice Roger B. Taney. In March of '57, the Supreme Court issued a 7-2 decision against Scott. In the opinion written by Taney, the court ruled that black people, this is a quote, are not included and were not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution, and can therefore claim none of its rights and privileges which that instrument provides for and secures to citizens of the United States, unquote. In other words, the court ruled that Scott was not an American citizen. And though Taney and several other justices hoped that this ruling would permanently settle the slavery controversy, its effect was almost the complete opposite. Taney's majority opinion was greeted with unmitigated wrath from every segment of the United States except the slaveholding states, as you might imagine. For this matter, I might mention Taney was originally from Maryland. A few years ago, a statue of him in Annapolis outside the state capitol building was removed. Yeah. Last but certainly not least, the fifth and final event that I will put before you today occurs in 1859. This is a raid. John Brown orchestrated a raid on Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Now it's in West Virginia. It's a darling little town that's a historical park now, should you get the chance to go. It's not too far away. But this was an effort led by abolitionist John Brown to initiate an armed slave revolt. And Brown was known for the murder of slaveholders in Bleeding, Kansas. And Brown determined that he would free the slaves in Virginia by instigating a revolt that would spread throughout the slave-holding state. To begin his slave revolt, Brown planned to capture the arsenal at Harper's Ferry and use the weapons captured there to arm his followers. And on the night of October 16th, Brown and 21 other men, including his sons, occupied the arsenal. However, this raid was doomed from the start. He lacked proper ammunition. He was unable to recruit any slaves to join the revolt. Brown and his men became trapped in the arsenal as militia from both Virginia and Maryland surrounded his fort. John Brown's fort. Here we go. When President Buchanan heard of the raid, he sent a company of 90 Marines, led by Colonel Robert E. Lee, to put down the rebellion. Brown was severely wounded in the struggle. He was sentenced to death in the aftermath. And on the morning of his execution, he wrote, "I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. I had, as I now think, vainly flattered myself that without very much bloodshed it might be done." This is what the fort looks like today. But he is hanged. And Brown's death set off a spark throughout the country. To Northern abolitionists, Brown was a martyr to the cause. To Southerners, he was a symbol of Northern aggression and Northern hopes to destroy the Southern way of life. John Brown's body became a popular marching tune for the Union Army. Julia Ward Howe soon after wrote more famous lyrics to the tune that we know as the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Better lyrics, no doubt. John Brown's fort, during the Civil War, this was used as a prison, a powder magazine, and perhaps a quartermaster supply house. Union troops admired the fort as they passed, while Confederate troops cursed it. Many troops broke pieces of brick and wood off the fort as souvenirs, and it was the only armory building to escape destruction during the Civil War. Fast forward from our time period in question today, but in 1891, those of you that I've seen in here before know I like World's Fairs, the fort was sold, dismantled, and transported to Chicago, where it was displayed a short distance from the Columbian Exposition. The building attracted only 11 visitors in 10 days. It was closed, dismantled again, and left just as a pile of bricks in a vacant lot before it was eventually moved back to Harper's Ferry. It's estimated that the current reconstructed fort, it's about 10 or 15% smaller than it was because Chicagoans had quarried the lot for brick. Yeah. They stole the brick, yeah. All right, so to conclude, the 1850s were a turbulent, pivotal decade defined by intense sectional conflict over slavery that brought the nation to the brink of civil war. Major political compromises failed to ease tensions, and this was the backdrop to the 1860 election. And if I direct your attention to that box in the lower right, in the northern states, people wondered, how is it that proponents of slavery seem to be gaining ground? Lots of threads of evidence in the 1850s that slave power is actually increasing, despite, again, look at the population, two-thirds of the nation's population is in the north.
Two-thirds of the white population?
Depends on how you want to count it. If you want to count the border, where do you want to put the border states, right? And there are some slave states that never seceded from the Union as well. So again, depends on how you want to count this. On the low end, it's about 60%. On the high end, it's about two-thirds, almost 70%. And that is where I'll wrap up. So thank you very much.